let me bring on Miss Anita Dittman. Miss Anita Dittman, as I told you a moment ago, is a Holocaust survivor, and when she was just a little girl, I'll let her tell her story better, but when she was just a little girl, when Nazism began to blow through Germany and Europe, right about that time, her father abandoned she and her siblings and her wife and his wife. Just abandoned them because he basically was afraid of what would happen to being related to a Jewish family. So Anita was raised by her mom, and at the age of 8, she became a believer in Jesus Christ as Lord and Messiah. And by the age of 10, the war had begun. She's written a book, along with Jan Markell, my dear friend, entitled Trapped in Hitler's Hell. And it's the true account of Holocaust horror. But also God's miraculous mercy. So I am looking forward to speaking with her about it. Nita, are you on the phone with us?
Yes, I am.
Great. It's so good to have you. What an honor. You know, I've got to tell you, I've been talking with Jackie Monahan, a friend of yours and mine, and she's been trying to get this book and movie to me, and I just got a hold of it late last night. So I have not read the book, but I am thoroughly familiar with what it's about, and I'm familiar with your story, and I've got to tell you, just a couple of hours before arriving at the studio, I picked it up and started reading it, and I did not want to put it down, but I had to. But I'm going to go back and finish it. It's an amazing story, Anita.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Well,
I always tell people that I had a wild childhood.
Yeah, well, you did have a wild childhood, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Well, listen, one of the things. Now, by the way, Wednesday, you were 88 years old on Wednesday, right?
No, 87.
87 on Wednesday. Okay, well, I'm not trying to add an extra year to your age.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
And you don't mind me announcing to the world how old you are, do you? Most women don't like
I'm
that.
87.
But, okay,
I'm
87. Well,
I never have a hard time telling people how old I am. I'm just grateful that the Lord is still using me for His purpose, and so I'm not ashamed to be 87.
I know. Well, you're blessed. You're blessed, and God has had His hand on you all of these years.
Oh, yes.
And
Still does.
Yeah, and also this book, Trapped in Hitler's Hell. Folks, you need to get this book. I'm telling you, I've just read the several first chapters, and it is amazing. It's consuming. It'll suck you right in. Trapped in Hitler's Hell. The foreword is written by Ray Comfort, another dear friend of mine, whom I have interviewed on this program, and Jan Markell helped to put this book together and to write it. She has authored 9 other books. She's the director of Olive Tree Ministries. She's heard on 650 radio stations to millions of people across the United States, and again, a dear friend of mine. So, Anita, I tell you what, you've got some amazing company there going. But listen, one of the things that you're doing is you're trying to warn America about the storm clouds that you see brewing. You see the rise of new anti-Semitism and things. Yeah, tell us about it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's not only anti-Semitism, it's also anti-Christian.
Yes, I know.
And I want to say something about that. I do a lot of speaking. And when I first started my ministry started 35 years ago, I was invited to any kind of school. Well, then it got tough in the bigger cities. So then when I moved up north to Crosby, to the iron mines, in 93, the doors of the schools were open. I would sometimes speak 5 times a day to 5 different classes.
Wow.
And I was so busy up there. But then gradually I noticed it was getting less and less. And then was 9/11, and the doors swung open. Excuse me.
That's okay.
The doors swung open.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted me to speak. Everybody was scared. But I remember my pastor up there, in my church up there, said, it won't last. As soon as we're safe again, it will all go dwindle, and it has.
Wow.
In fact, I was still living up there. Pardon me. In Minnesota, everybody has a cough. We call it the Minnesota frog.
I know. Listen, I was I'm going to give you a chance for your voice to rest. I was in Minnesota preaching a prophecy conference in Minneapolis just 3 or 4 weeks ago, and spring had already sprung, but when I landed, you guys had another major snowstorm. I don't know if you remember. It was one of the last spurts.
Oh, yeah.
I was there when that happened, and everybody was calling it Minnesota.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was invented by a man who entertained children, and it was a children's program.
Right.
He always called it Minnesota.
Minnesota. And, and everybody up there had that strangling cough that you have right now. Bless your heart.
Well, I'll do my best.
Yeah.
I'm sucking a cough drop, so it should work.
Okay.
But do I see? Well, yeah, I see this, and what I want to come back to about my message.
Yes.
I had a phone call when I was living up north, about 2-3 years ago, and it was early summer vacation, and a gentleman from Rogers, it's in Minnesota, wanted to have me come and speak to his class in the fall. And he said that some kids that have heard you speak, and they were so moved by it, they said, you got to have her come. And so I called him back. And this was kind of a phone tag for a while, and then I finally talked to him, via the phone, and he said, we would just love to have you come. I said, I would love to come. However, I want to tip you off on something. There's Christ in my message.
Right.
Because, sometimes the teacher could lose his job if he invites a Christian to speak in this public school. And he said, well, couldn't you leave Christ out of there and make it a kind of a more historical story? You could still talk about your persecution.
Right.
I said, no, sir.
Thank you.
I cannot leave Christ out. Christ is the center of my life. He was the center of my life when I went through 12 and a half years of the Holocaust. And if it weren't for Christ, I wouldn't be here talking to you.
Anita,
I can't leave that. And I cannot deny my Lord.
Yes, thank you.
And he said, I'm sorry, then you can't come.
Wow.
And it's getting more and more. The only schools that I now am invited to are the Christian schools, but not the secular schools anymore. So they say when anti-Semitism rises and the Jews are being persecuted, the Christians follow right afterwards.
Yeah. What an amazing insight. And, I do appreciate your boldness in the Lord, and I know that comes from the Lord. And I liked you before you even came on because I knew of you and knew you. But now in the Lord, I love you, my sister.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate.
I feel very honored.
Well, I do. I appreciate your boldness. So listen, let me just ask you. So, good gracious, I tell you what, let's do. We do have one quick little time out, and let's go ahead and take it. She is the author of the book Trapped in Hitler's Hell, and it's the story of a young Jewish girl, that would be Anita herself, who discovered the Lord Jesus, the Messiah's faithfulness, God's faithfulness in the middle of the Nazi Holocaust. The foreword to this book is written by Ray Comfort, another very good friend of mine, and Jan Markell is involved in it as well, another good friend of mine. So, Anita, thank you again so much for being on the show today. Listen,
I want to mention something. People always say I'm the author. Yes, I am in a way. It's a subject, but Jan did all the writing. I gave her everything in detail, and she recorded some of it, and then I gave it to her in writing, and from there on, she wrote the book.
Well, there you go. Well,
I like to give her the credit that credit is due to her.
Absolutely, and I will as well. So she is a tremendous writer. She's written, I think, 8 or 9 other books as well.
She's fantastic.
Yeah.
And Tyndale was the original publisher, and they told us when we sent the manuscript, they said it was beautiful, but people don't read as much anymore. It has to be, no more than about 180 or 90 pages. And so she had to condense it from there. But she did such a fantastic job. Only I know the gaps.
Yeah. I hear you. Well, and this book is published by WND Books out of Washington, D.C.
Yes, it is now.
Yes.
Yeah. And it has been published several times by different authors, and now the final one is WND, and I'm very grateful, although I still love my previous publisher. I'm still in touch with her as a friend, but I know WND is doing a great job.
Yeah, they're marvelous, marvelous publishers. And as a matter of fact, they've also produced a documentary movie about your book by this title. So, folks, you can get the book and the movie, Amazon.com, WND Superstore, and probably anywhere that good books are sold. And
Jan Markell has a whole lot of those. They can order it from her, too.
Okay, good. You can get them from Jan Markell and her website as well. It's called Trapped in Hitler's Hell. Trapped in Hitler's Hell. And WND Books, they have the highest percentage of New York Times bestsellers of any publisher in the world. Yeah, they're tremendous publishers. I want to talk about you, but I'm very blessed. I have 2 books published by WND Books and a third one on its way. So I know what an excellent publishing company they are. But back to you, Anita. Back to you. Mm-hmm. So you found Christ at a very early age, around 7 years of age. Tell us about that.
I have to get a little past. Before then, what happened was. My father left us, but for me, life was wonderful because I was very blessed. I had a very agile body, and my mother enrolled me in ballet when I was only 4. And by the time I was almost 7, I was between 6 and 7, my teacher said, "You're going to dance with the big girls now," and she invited me to be one of the performers in solo dance. Right. And the review was overwhelming after I danced, and a huge audience, and of course Hitler was already in full swing. And the review read it says that the dance was superbly performed by young Anita Dittmann, way above her age level. But the German people are not willing to be entertained by a Jew.
Yeah.
And I thought my world would come to an end. And my teacher had promised me that, all the wonderful things that would happen if I became a prima ballerina. And she was one too at one time. And she said, people will literally worship you. But it was only about 2 months later, it was Easter time, and my playmates that had invited me to church to go with them many, many times. And my mother gave me that freedom, although she was not a believer. And my father, of course, was an atheist, but he had taken off and left, and we didn't know where he was. But I thought my world was coming to an end. And then when Christ, it was on that Easter morning that Christ came into my life, I was so blessed. I felt a freedom inside of me. I had a feeling of total security, much more than I experienced in those first 5.5 years of plush middle-class living. It was different, and I was so excited. I ran home with my friends after the service, and I burst into the door of our apartment, and I wanted to share this with my mother and my sister, and my sister raised her eyebrows and shook her head, and my mother just smiled, and she says, "Honey, I know your wonderful imagination. Come on now." I said, "It is not my imagination. It's real, Mom." But they weren't ready for it yet. And I remember I was almost in tears when I talked to my friends, and I said, "What am I going to do about them?" She said, "You can't do anything about it." She said, "Just let them know how wonderful it is to have Christ, and the blessing and the security and the comfort and peace, the inner peace. But you can't do anything. You let God do it. Hand it to Him. Talk to Him, and He will take care of it."
Wow.
And they were right.
Right.
He did, because I was about 11 when a wonderful minister came into our life from an inner city church. He was one of the confessional church of the Lutheran Church,
right?
Like Bonhoeffer and Niemöller. And he loved the Jewish people so much, and because of that, because of his unwavering faith that never ever let the Nazis in at all, and he stood up for his faith, and he could have been put into a camp, but the Lord protected him, and it was through him that my mother became a Christian finally. She saw not only his teaching and his preaching, but his life, that he so boldly proclaimed the faith and also the love for the Jewish people.
Yeah.
And there were several Jewish people in that Bible study that also converted to Christianity.
Wow.
So you see, I always say you can know the Bible backwards and forwards. You can, repeat every verse that's in it. But if your actions don't follow, we're not very convincing. We got to live that way too.
That's right.
And it's hard.
And it is hard, but that's a good word. That's a good word. Spot on. Listen, we've only got about a minute and a half. Tell us some of your experiences. So you, as a teenager, then you were in some of Hitler's concentration camps. Tell us about that.
Well, at first they picked up my mother. When I was 16, they came and picked up my mother, and they took her to a camp called Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia. But I was able at least to send her some food packages now and then. Of course, I was suspended from school when I was 15 because of my Jewish heritage, and was put into heavy factory labor. And then one fine day, about 7 months after they had picked up my mother, I got a notification to stand in line the next morning, and I went to a camp